Hey, this is Coach Shay with Alpha Girl Soccer Academy, and welcome to the Alpha Girl Soccer Podcast Show, where we aim to inspire, empower, and positively impact female athletes. Welcome back to the Alpha Girl Soccer Podcast Show. My guest today is a former student athlete turned attorney, writer, and entrepreneur. Her work has been featured on ESPNW, Forbes, and Self Magazine. She dedicates her time, talents, and skills to improving on the experiences of student athletes and to changing the public perception of athletes, especially female athletes and women in sports. Please welcome Cecelia Townes. Cecelia, how you doing?
Thank you very much. I'm doing well.
Good. Hope we got everything in the bio. If not, we'll go through it a little bit later, but pretty good. I got it from your website, so hopefully it's pretty accurate. So I'm super excited to have you on today because I know we're going to dive into how, middle school, high school, and college athletes can use their strengths that they learned in their sport into the professional world and beyond. And I think it's something that every athlete needs to hear. So I'm super excited to have you on and kind of dive in. So before we kind of get into everything, I want you, if you can give our listeners, tell us a little bit more about you and your story.
Yeah, so thanks again for having me on.
Mm-hmm.
But I got my start in sports as an athlete. My dad played tennis in college and ended up being a tennis coach. And so he taught my brothers and I how to play tennis. But I also played soccer and ran track. So I was just an athlete. I love sports. When I went to college at Howard, I actually went on an academic scholarship, but I still wanted to play sports. So the coach actually knew of me and knew my family, tried out for the team, and, I made the team. After maybe like getting into my senior year, I kind of realized, I'm graduating soon and I need to figure out what I'm going to do. So I thankfully ended up getting into law school, a pretty good law school, UCLA. Went there. I actually thought when I went to law school, though, that was going to be it for sports, and I was just going to go, practice criminal law and, leave sports behind, so to speak. But I mean, pretty quickly after graduating and passing the bar, I realized that I needed a little something extra. I wanted to get back in sports and to make an impact in the sports industry. And so, I thought back on my experience as a student athlete, what I needed, and I started my organization Beyond the Game, and we started providing life skills workshops for student athletes. And then not too long after that, pretty close in time, I really realized that I didn't appreciate how women in sports were being portrayed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started a blog, Gladiators. And it was really initially just to, get my thoughts out about how women in the industry are treated as athletes, our presence in front offices, our presence on screen. So yeah, and since that time, it's blossomed into what it is now. We provide events, workshops, mentorship, and content still on the blog, but it's all around women in the sports industry.
That's amazing. And I think that's an awesome resource, which I want to get into a little bit later about how, athletes can get involved with you.
Yeah.
But going back to like your, I guess, high school and college experience, were you always, so obviously as an academic All-American, you were very driven athletically and academically. Were you always like that, as a little kid and going through middle school and high school, or did it kind of just spurred out during college years?
Yeah, no, I definitely was. I tell people all the time, I played sports, but I was a bit of a nerd. I really enjoyed school.
Mm-hmm.
And so, just kind of being a type A personality, my grades were always important to me. My parents didn't have to stay on me about going to school and getting good grades. So it was definitely something that's always been there. And, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was basically had a lifetime of time management, learning how to balance, you know, schoolwork and sports. I've been doing it since elementary school, essentially.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's actually the next question I was going to ask is like, how were you able to balance, all of your academics excelling in that and excelling in the athletic in college? Because that's seriously one of the hardest things is doing that. So how would you say, what skills did you use? Obviously time management, but what else did you use to do so well in both?
Yeah, I think I prioritized. So I decided at a fairly young age what was important to me. And I think it's probably the way my parents raised me. I just decided I didn't care what was important to everybody else. So if I had friends and maybe they were, not doing so hot in school, or maybe they didn't care about sports, but I did, I was still going to do me.
Right.
And so I think it's really important for young women to decide that early on what's important to you and focus on those things, irrespective of what other people might be interested in or what other people might be trying to get you to do.
Yeah, I love that. And it's almost like those priorities can like guide your
Yes.
decision making, because there's so many girls that I see and it's like they say they want to get better at soccer, but their priorities and their values don't really align with that. And then
Exactly.
they get pulled all these different directions. So I think that's really important, at a young age to just kind of prioritize like what's really important to you. And then your
Mm-hmm.
actions should obviously align with your priorities.
Yep.
Yeah. So out of kind of the skills, time management, prioritizing, out of all of the skills that you developed as an athlete, what skills have been kind of the most important for you to transition those skills
Yeah.
into the workforce?
I would say one of the things is communication. So, as an attorney and a writer, that's all I do. I'm
Right.
constantly communicating with my clients, with supervisors, with opposing counsel, and when I'm writing, I'm trying to you know put legal terms or legal ideas into lay terms. And so I think that I really started being able to be a good communicator with sports. You're constantly having to talk to your teammates. Everybody has a different personality. So you have to figure out ways to communicate with everybody on your team in a way that's effective. You're also communicating in usually very intense situations,
Mhm.
communicating in the middle of the game while you're trying to dribble the ball and score. And that's a lot.
Mhm.
So I think I became very comfortable communicating and comfortable communicating in different ways with different types of people.
Yeah, that's really important because obviously you have teammates that you have to communicate with, you have coaches, and you
Yeah,
have, 30 other teammates that all have different personalities.
right.
So yeah, I would say, what would you say has helped you to, I guess, get really good at communication? Were you always good at it in college, or what did you do to like really hone in on that skill?
So I think I've actually always been pretty much of an extrovert, right?
Hmm.
So I was never shy. I didn't have that problem, but I've had to probably learn to pull back sometimes and not say everything that's on my mind. Um, and so I definitely think that sports has helped me do that as well, knowing just kind of when to be quiet, when to listen, because just as important as it is talking, it's important to listen. Listen to your teammates, listen to your coaches, all of that. So yeah, I think definitely over time, especially, I was the team captain for 2 years on the tennis team. And that definitely helped me hone my communication and listening skills. Just, you kind of become the intermediary between the coach and your teammates in a lot of instances. So yeah, they definitely got better over time, and I would say sports helped me improve as a communicator.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So what would you say is a skill that most athletes don't really think that is needed in sport, that they
Mhm.
actually already possess, whether they know it or not, and that they're going to have to use in the workplace no matter what they do? Anything off the top of your head?
I mean, I think we underestimate the power of our ability to problem solve.
Mm.
So, I think in every career that you engage in, at some point you're going to have to figure something out without somebody there with you to help you. And I think athletes don't always realize that we're doing that constantly. There's always some sort of obstacle in our way that we didn't prepare for. You know, there's always somebody's getting injured, or hey, somebody's playing a lot better than I thought they were going to play. You know, so how am I going to adjust? That's really problem solving in pretty high stress situations. And if you can recognize that you have the ability to do that well, not only is it an asset when you're working, but it's a great selling point. You know, when you're trying to get a job, when you're trying to maybe book a client, if you're an entrepreneur. Yeah, we're excellent problem solvers.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I know we kind of talked about this on our pre-call, and if you don't have the numbers, that's totally cool. But
Okay.
I wanted to see if you had the numbers, because we talked about like the number of like female CEOs that
Okay.
played a sport. Do you have those on you?
Yeah, so the last time I looked, it was like the statistic was crazy. It was like 94% of
Wow.
women in C-suite positions played sports.
Hmm.
And then it dropped down a little bit for Fortune 500 companies. It was something like 50 something percent of their of female CEOs for Fortune 500 companies also played sports.
Wow. Yeah,
So
that's
it really speaks to our ability to be leaders and to sort of, yeah, just take charge. And, you know, if you're the CEO of a company, you're not just skilled in one thing. You have to have the ability and the knowledge in a lot of different things. You become like a generalist, an expert slash generalist. So the fact that so many of those women played sports is just, yes, a testament to what we have, the gifts we have.
And what would you say like the relationship between playing a sport and confidence is? Because that's huge. A
Yeah.
lot of players struggle with confidence when they're playing sport, but also playing sport can make you extremely confident in the workplace. So what do you
Yeah.
think? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually just wrote an article for NACDA
Mm.
about this very thing. And um, oftentimes you see that, you know, we're confident in our sports, right? We know what we're doing. We're out there because we've rehearsed it, because our teammates are out there. And for athletes, oftentimes it translates. It can translate into our professional spaces, but maybe it takes a little work to translate. So there's a study done about the perceptions about men and women in the workplace and their ability to be leaders. And one study showed that, you know, when you lay aside biases, because actually the numbers actually show that women fare better as leaders, and that there's not a ton of bias between people thinking men and women can lead. So when you set all that aside,
Yeah,
the thing that women lack in getting leadership positions is confidence. They
interesting.
don't believe in themselves. And so if student athletes, as women, as girls, if we can make sure that our confidence on the field is transferring to the boardroom or to whatever professional space, like, we can be leaps and bounds above everybody. But it comes down to confidence. And I always tell people, just like you rehearse for that soccer game, rehearse for that interview, rehearse for that presentation that you have to give. Because the more you rehearse, just like you do at practice, the more confident you become.
Right. So, I mean, so I was going to ask, but you kind of just answered it, is like, how do you transfer that confidence from the field of the court
Yeah.
over to the workplace? Is it a lot of just like preparation, just like you would practice, stuff like that?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like, if you treat your job like your sport, you can really win at it. So
Hmm.
every athlete has a goal. At some point, the goal is to beat this team. The goal is to win the championship. The goal is to learn this shot. And when we set the goal, then we are constantly practicing
Hmm.
and refining until we reach that goal. And then we go
Absolutely.
execute it. And so
Hmm.
I think if we treat work that way, we're going to kill it. Set the goal of getting the job, set the goal of, nailing this presentation, rehearse it, practice it, and then go do it.
For sure. So in that sense, how important is learning how to set goals now while a player's in middle school, while they're in high school? How important is that to learn now and start using it?
Yeah, it's so, so important because I think it's relevant at every stage of your life.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think at any point are you going to stop aspiring to things. And, for me, the way I've always attained anything I wanted is to set it as a goal, because I think you set it as a goal, especially when you write it down for you to see.
Mm-hmm.
It's like constantly in your face. It's a constant reminder, a constant motivator to do things when you don't want to do them. So I think in setting the goal, you're also establishing some discipline for yourself. You're motivating yourself. And so the younger you can start setting the goals, the better you are at it. The more you form a habit of goal setting and goal attaining.
And I think a lot of players and youth players are scared to set goals because of a few reasons. One, they might not know how to set goals. And two, I think that a lot of time they're afraid of not meeting those goals, of feeling like a failure if they don't meet those goals. So what advice would you give, like just how to set a goal in the most simplistic way, but it's still be effective?
Yeah. So I would say one, I always go back to listen to yourself, right? What do you want to do?
Mm-hmm.
That is the goal. If you want to go out there and, you want to be a better dribbler, that's your goal. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to, I think people get in trouble sometimes when they set goals based on other people's expectations.
Absolutely.
So set goals that you are genuinely interested in meeting. And you can really keep them simple. You can start very small, like, all right, my goal, and if I know I need to get better, I'll probably have to put in extra practice. So my goal for this week is to stay late for 15 minutes every day and practice. Start small. And as you start to attain those goals, you're like, oh, like that's not that bad. I can add on something else, or I can set a goal that's a little more substantial. But then I think you just have to not be afraid. Like you're gonna fail.
Absolutely.
I think the younger that you realize that you're gonna take L's and you're gonna take a lot of L's, the better off you are. Because you'll realize a couple of things. That one, is not so bad. Like everybody around you is going through the same things, so it's not that bad. And two, you can learn lessons. Like every time you fail at something, every time you lose, there's always an opportunity to flip it into a lesson and make you better for next time.
Absolutely. Like I love the topic of failure because so many kids are scared of it, but it's so important for success. So I'm going to put you on the spot here. Do you have, what would you say was like your biggest failure, no matter like sports or non-related to sports? And then what did you learn from it, or what came of that failure?
Yeah. So, well, there are many. I'll just pick one I think that's relevant as back when I set out to help athletes. My original way of helping student athletes or helping athletes, period, was not through Beyond the Game. A group of friends and I decided that we were going to start a sports agency. And it was myself and like 4 other ladies. And we all had these unique skill sets, but we didn't know anybody. We didn't know athletes. We didn't know people in branding and marketing, but we did it. Anyway, we had our website up, we were telling people, and it flopped. We took a complete L. Lost a little money. But in the process, I realized I really was passionate about helping athletes. And that even if that didn't work out, I was still going to figure out a way to do it. So I learned, about my own passion for it. I learned some things that you need in order. So if I ever went back to representing athletes, I could pull from that initial experience. So yeah, like I wouldn't be where I am today if I had failed. I mean, if I had stopped after I failed.
Yeah. And that's the thing with failures. Like in the moment, like you don't realize that there's probably something good that can come of it, whether it's a new opportunity that's meant for you, or whether it's just you learn like a very, very simple basic lesson.
Mhm.
So I think that's a really important point to drive home, is that everybody has failures. It's just about, like you said, like how you get up after you fail. So I love
Yep.
that. So let's go back into leadership a little bit. So you said that like women generally make better leaders than men. Why do you
Mhm.
think that is?
So based on those statistics and that study, it's our ability to be openly empathetic
Mhm.
and to like be willing to show emotion. That's important. We're often much better communicators as well.
Right.
And so those things really bode well when you're talking about like not just being any old kind of leader, but a good leader.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting you said empathetic. So I feel like in media, it's like when women are portrayed, they portray women as empathetic, and it's kind they kind of think of it as a bad thing, like, oh, they're too emotional, or
Yes.
their hearts in it and they're too bought in, I guess. Have
Yes.
you kind of seen that same thing with women in media, whether it's professional or like college sports?
Yeah, I definitely think we are have to battle against the stereotype that we're just over emotional,
Hmm.
and that our emotions are the things that get the best of us. But when you look closely at um, some of the like more well-known women in leadership roles in
Hmm.
sports, they're having an impact because they can connect with people, and you don't connect with people just being like a stoic and always being completely about
Hmm.
business.
Right.
People learn to respect you and listen to you when they feel like you're human.
Hmm.
So, obviously there's balance. You wouldn't expect somebody to be crying at work all the time, or always letting people cry on their shoulder. But having a measure of um, empathy is important. And even though, it's used as a negative stereotype against us right now, it's
Definitely.
very necessary.
And then, like you said, you're an extrovert. I would probably say I'm an introvert.
Okay.
But I think it's a big misconception that in order to be a good leader, that you have to be extroverted, that you have to, like confrontation and all that stuff. Do you think that that's 100% false? Or like for someone that's introverted, what leaders do they possess that maybe an extroverted leader wouldn't possess?
Yeah. So I think, well, one, it is absolutely false. You don't have to be an extrovert. I think that the connotation behind being a leader is one that, it's someone who's always out in front, and they're giving orders and dictating and rallying the troops. But that's not the only way you can lead. You can
Mhm.
absolutely lead by influencing people that you have close, intimate contact with, by the way you just carry yourself and the way you behave. People will watch you, and in that way you can be a leader. And Wait, what was the other part of the question?
Like what parts of being an introvert, like what skills do they possess that maybe
Yeah.
an extrovert wouldn't possess?
Yeah, I think probably the ability to like connect with people one on one. So introverts, from my understanding, since I'm not one, is that it's not that they're completely shy. It's that they would rather do their communicating, in a more intimate setting.
Mhm.
And I think that as far as a leader goes, that's something that's very important when you're talking about being able to motivate people individually. Being able to be comfortable with that intimate contact is very key. I mean, because everybody in a crowded room, they're not going to have the same motivations. They're not going to
Mhm.
be able to communicate the same way. So if the introverted person is really, great at breaking down people into smaller groups and communicating that way, that's a huge asset.
Yeah, totally. So how can student athletes now, so let's say there's a middle schooler that has big hopes and big dreams, for once they're done playing, how can they kind of strengthen and sharpen these skills now? So time management, leadership,
Yeah.
discipline, prioritizing, all that stuff. How can they kind of sharpen those skills now so that they're even stronger once they're done playing their sport?
Yeah, I would say do an assessment first, right? So I think we're all, if we look at, um, you know, what we aspire to be, I think some in some things we're strong, and then at
Mhm.
some things we're on the weak side.
Right.
And so I think that one of the things they can do is figure out what their weaknesses are
Yeah.
and work on those things. So if you're not really great at time management, start putting things in place now to help you with that. Set little alarms for yourself, have accountability partners to keep you focused and stay on track. Yeah, I would say identify the things that need working on and focus on those, because the things you're already good at, I mean, you're going to naturally excel at those.
Yeah.
Those are all going to keep getting better. But the more you neglect the things that you're weak at, the more they can become a hindrance to you in the future.
Yeah. And like naturally, we want to avoid those
Yes.
weaknesses, right? Like we
Yeah.
don't want to work on it. If you suck at time management, you don't want to work on it because you're not good at it. So I think that's super important that you like just take a look at like what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses, and then really dive into those weaknesses and just make little steps, like you said, setting an alarm, buying a planner and writing all your homework down or
Yep.
whatever it is. So just taking those little steps towards your weaknesses, because if you can do that now, when
Mm-hmm.
you are done with your sport, you will thank yourself for taking the
Yes.
time to do that,
Absolutely. Yep.
before you're got to feed your family or whatever it is.
Yep.
Yeah. Um, so I want to get into like being an athlete and having like an identity crisis when you're done. So for me, I had that a little bit. So it's like once I was done playing soccer, I was no longer like people would ask me who I was, right? And I was always Shea Haddo, soccer player for Utah State, right?
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of athletes when they're done playing their sport, like they don't really know who they are. It's just like my name is Shea, and I don't know who I am.
Right.
I don't know what I do without the sport. And like for me, I still have this sport that I identify with, but a lot of people aren't going to have that. So
Yeah.
what, I guess, like advice would you have for athletes that are going through that, whether it's, they're just done playing high school or maybe they're done with their college? What advice would you give them to kind of like find their passion and their true identity?
Yeah, so there's actually an activity that I do with my student athletes, and it's like a purpose exercise. So we start by asking them, outside of sports, if you could do anything and you had no chance of failing at it, like what would it be?
Mhm.
And we use that as a starting point to like really get them to figure out at their core what they're interested in. So I encourage all student athletes, no matter what, and their parents really, to sort of guide them in this. But no matter what sport you play, get to the core of you. Like,
Mhm.
what do you like outside of your sport? What are your strengths? Sometimes we go back to the strengths and weaknesses. What outside of your sport makes you happy? What are you like really, really good at? Um, and I think that the more you can hone in on those things, so if you can look at your strengths, figure out your strengths, you figure out sort of what makes you tick and what makes you happy, and you can merge those together. I really think that's where you start moving in your purpose, because you're moving with what you're really good at and what you can bring to society.
Mhm.
And then you're also, doing something that's going to make you happy on the inside, which, is going to continue to motivate you. So if you match those two things with a need in society, then I think, you're golden. But you don't get there until you look at yourself. You get to know who you are outside of your sport, what you're strong
Mhm.
at, what like makes you happy, what other people see in you. So I've noticed that sometimes people aren't really good at realizing what they're good at. Ask other people.
Right. Yeah.
What am I good at? Like, what do you know me for? How do you see me?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times people can recognize things in us that we can't recognize in ourselves.
Absolutely. So, like with the athletes that you work with, are they mostly ex-college athletes or high school athletes?
They're in college.
They're in college right now. Are they still playing their sport?
Yep.
Okay. So what would you say, like most of those athletes, so a two-part question, what would you say most of them, what's the best skill that they all possess? And then what's the skill that they are like really like, I guess one of their weaknesses that they're trying to get better at before they move on to the workplace?
I would say by and large, they're all really, really tenacious. So you don't get to play college sports at any level by like being timid and by giving up, because it's a difficult thing. I mean, even if you're super smart and super talented at your sport, you know, there are going to be obstacles in your way.
Yeah.
And so I would say all of them across the board, they have like just these amazing individual stories of overcoming and not letting anything stop them. They're just very, very resilient. And as far as things they need to work on, I would say in general, they just, they're like you and I were. They were like, I mean, sports is like, you know, we go to school, we go play our sport, and that's it. You know,
Right. Yeah.
who cares about what I'm going to do when I'm 25, right? And so I think that's probably just, you know, there tends to be a little delay in figuring out that next step.
Yeah. And so we haven't talked about this now or yet until now, and you said like tenacity.
Mhm.
And that's like seriously probably the most important thing for you to be successful in anything you do. And I've noticed from working with, you know, I work with mostly like middle schoolers, some high schoolers, but I feel like, and I may be biased because I'm a millennial and they're a different generation, but I feel like kids now
Mhm.
lack a little bit of tenacity.
Yeah.
Do you kind of get that sense too? I mean, I know you
Yeah.
don't work with younger athletes, but do
Yeah.
you kind of see that as well?
Yeah, I think I was actually having a conversation not too long ago about this. I think society has, especially with social media,
Mhm.
given the impression of overnight successes. So,
Absolutely.
like kids, you know, look at social media and they see a bunch of stars, you know, whether they're in sports or whether they're on YouTube, and they think that these people got there, you know, in an instant.
Hmm.
And so for them, it's like, well, this isn't working. Why isn't it working? I'm not going to do it anymore. When in actuality, if they sat down and talked to those people, they'd be like, yeah, I was a broke YouTube person for a long time. Or, you know, I was an athlete who wasn't really good at this and I had to make myself good at it. Or my first team didn't work out, so I had to go to another team. So I think I would agree that they're probably lacking in that.
Yeah, and with social media, it's like you see where they're at right now, but
Yeah,
it's like we don't see all the failures, all the hard work, all the sleepless nights that they had to get to the point that they're at.
yeah.
So it's like social media, like there's so much good, but
Mhm.
also there's I don't want to say so much bad. There's just a lot of bad things about it, and it's like this generation that I'm talking about, they literally grew up with social media.
That's
And
right.
for like you and I, we didn't have it until like high school or college.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's just like for me, it's hard for me to understand like why aren't kids as tenacious? Why
mhm,
aren't they maybe as hardworking?
mhm.
So that's just kind of been like a ongoing like discussion that I've been having with a lot of people.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I was literally thinking this yesterday. I don't know why, but I was like, you know, there's gonna come a time when everybody like understands life with social media, right? So that
Yeah.
there's gonna come a time when people's grandparents grew up with social media,
Right.
and I think that's a different world. Like the ideas of privacy, the ideas of sort of social acceptance, that's completely different in the social media age than it was when we were coming up there. Like, I mean, I feel like we had pressures, obviously, right? But those pressures were generally kind of confined to our circle. We weren't constantly bombarded with images of people we don't know from
Hmm.
social media telling us what we should look like and what we should aspire to. We certainly didn't share everything that happened to us on the internet.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I think it's creating a different way of living, a different way of thinking. Some good, but a lot kind of worries me.
Yeah, and that's so crazy to think that literally, like you said, pretty soon everybody's gonna like know social media and has grown up with social media. And honestly, I'm glad to say that I wasn't. Like
Yeah,
I feel like I had so much more fun as a kid, like being a kid and not having social media, which is kind of off topic. But I just, like I just like I feel like I was able to focus more on my sport and develop those like that tenacity and just I was able to develop those things that maybe I wouldn't have if
yeah,
I was, on social media all the
yeah,
time.
yeah. And general love for the game and your friends, and like just, yeah, general connections that I think, we can kind of be lacking in the social media age.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit more about like gladiators and beyond the game. So like if there's someone listening right now,
Hmm.
I want them to be able to connect with you, if they're in the position to do so. So if
Yeah,
someone does want to connect to you, number one, like who specifically do you work with? And is there people that you specifically like don't work with?
yeah,
And then just give us a little bit more about like what exactly the process is and how it can help
yeah,
athletes.
yeah. So I mean, our target audience are college student athletes, and women who are, and then so as far as the athletes, mostly college student athletes.
Gotcha.
We do like deal with high schoolers and middle school. If a coach wanted us to come and talk to their girls, or I've talked to school classes, teams, we do that too. Because I think the skills that we're learning or we're helping people learn about leadership, about self-identifying, though it doesn't, you can start that very, very young,
Mm-hmm.
to have an impact. So those are like the workshops that we do: leadership development, personal identification, meaning sort of identifying your purpose, identifying your strengths and weaknesses. Um, and we also, obviously, we're accessible through the blog, but if people wanted to bring us in for a workshop, then you could just email me or DM me. I'm Sporty Esquire on all of my social media. CeciliaTownes.com is the website. What else? Yeah, schools, typically how it works though is a school will bring us in to talk to their girls.
Okay.
So we have a list of workshops that we provide, and the school just essentially brings us in. They decide what student athletes are going to
Mm-hmm.
attend, and we provide the workshop.
So the athletes that you work with, do you work with them like one-on-one or do you work with them in like a group setting?
Yeah, group setting.
Okay, like how
So
many?
yeah, so I've done like 2 sessions of maybe like 50 each, in a day before. So it really just, it depends on who the school wants there. Yeah, it could be small, it could be one team, or it could be all the female athletes in a program.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool. Do you do any like virtual stuff or is it kind of just local
Yeah,
to you?
it's in person. I will travel if necessary, but I don't really do any virtual coaching just yet. And I think
Gotcha.
when we incorporate that, it'll probably be on an individual.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Cool.
Yeah.
So, one last question. If you could leave our listeners with the most important advice you could possibly give them, what would it be?
I would say to do what makes you tick. So it goes back to what we were saying earlier. If
Mhm.
you figure out what your priorities are and chase those relentlessly, if you figure out what you're good at and don't worry about what your friend's good at, you figure out who you are, it's going to make life a lot simpler because you can be your own guide. You can sort of dictate where you're going to go based on, I know myself. I know this is what I'm good at. I know this is what I love. So that would be it. You know, we were just talking about social media and how it can influence you. Like, try to tune those things out so that you can get to who you really are. Because all of that stuff can be very, very distracting. So yeah, get to the core of who you are, and then follow that. And
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna win every time. You might not win initially. You might, you know, have some setbacks, but in the end, you'll win.
Yeah, like guys, she said chase your dreams relentlessly, relentlessly. So it's not going to happen overnight. Like you're going to fail a million times, but if it's truly what you love and what makes you tick, don't ever like give up on your goals, on your dreams. I haven't ever given up. Cecelia has never given up. That's why where we are today, and we've both failed millions of times.
Yeah,
But if you can just be relentless and like chasing your dreams, no one can stop you.
that's right.
Absolutely. So where can people connect with you, learn more about gladiators, beyond the game, that kind of thing?
So on all social media, I'm Sporty Esquire. My website is CeciliaTownes.com. And then Gladiators specifically is gladiators.com. On Instagram, we're at Gladiators. On Twitter, we are just the letter R, Gladiators. We're both I'm on Facebook, Gladiators on Facebook. So yeah, we kind of make it easy for you. Get on whatever your favorite platform is, and we're there.
And that's when you should be on social media. And that's
Yeah.
when you will, when you do the right things on social media, it'll help you. And then gladiators is gladiate and then hers with an H.
Yeah.
So just for you, I'll put everything in the show notes below this. But if you're just going to go look it up right now, gladiate and then hers, which is awesome. I love that. Like, that's so clever. All right, guys, thanks so much for listening to this episode. I hope you got a ton of value out of it. And make sure that everything that Cecelia has said, make sure that you're taking those assessments, taking the time to work on your weaknesses, because I promise you, it'll help you in your life beyond your sport. And if you want to watch us interact, you can do so on YouTube. Make sure you go follow Cecelia on Instagram and Twitter, and we will see you on next week's episode.